So just to show you though, the first thing I do is install create React app globally. That's the global flag. Or you can do --global, the whole word. That would work as well. You can see it didn't take too long. I already had it, but just to show you that it works. And now what I will do is I'll do create React app and the name of the app. And I'm going to call it painting app. If I do that, you notice that it's actually fetching stuff from the interwebs. It's going to take a little while. You can see they created this painting app folder for me. And very similarly to what Rails does, it will create a whole folder structure with some initial structure. I'm going to give it some time because it usually does take a little bit. And this is not something that you can do if you have no internet connection, because you're actually downloading libraries every time, which is not great. But what I recommend is if you want to be able to do this on an airplane or without wasting so much data, if you're not on Wi-Fi, you can do this once and then have that little folder as a template, and then you can copy paste that folder to create successive projects without any internet connection. Just going to watch the bar finish. Yeah, go for it. Sorry? So you can take a whole npm repository with you on the go. You could do that. You can install, I think, you can install repos directly by doing npm I and then the address of the repo. And that could work locally as well, I believe. But sure, you can put them in a hard drive and use that. Kind of, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but let's not get too much into that because that's more of an npm thing. And yeah, you could. npm, there's many ways of installing. You can check the npm documentation and you can point npm to an address. So even if you had your own little hard drive, you could serve that, and you can then just do npm install and the address of the library you're trying to install. That should work. But let's see what we got here. So you'll notice that it tells me a couple of cool things. So success, we've created it. It tells me what it is. It tells me that I can do npm start to start it. npm build. What do you think npm build does? I mean, it says it there, bundles. But what do you think that means? Wow. What does it mean to bundle? It does a couple of things. So bundling is just that, right? So putting everything into one file. We do the same with CSS, and then we only have one HTML file. So when we do a run build, we end up having one single HTML, one single CSS file, and one single JavaScript file. The other reason why we bundle, first because we can reduce the size of the application, make it more efficient. Secondly, because when we're writing components, the JavaScript we write is not JavaScript that the browser can understand. So in the process of bundling, you don't just put everything into one file, you also turn everything into really, I think ES5 JavaScript that Internet Explorer could understand, for example. To minimize the file size, they use a couple of techniques called minifying and uglifying. They're real terms. And what they do is they turn all the variables into one-letter things, and they compress as much as they can from your text. So if you have long variables, everything will be tiny. What you end up with is some really obfuscated code. Maybe we can see that later on, but you're not meant to really read that. It's just for the browser. So what they created here, you can see that they actually created a repo for us. They created a package JSON, so they started an npm repo there. You can see a couple of things. You can see that they wrote some scripts for us. So this React script start, React script build, etc. We can run this with npm start, npm run build, npm test, npm run eject. So those are little scripts that we wrote. I can create one if I wanted to as well. I can say, this is just the bash script, so I can say echo hello there. Maybe that will work. Or maybe not. Oh, I didn't close it. So now I can do, go to the bottom and say npm run greet. And it fails.
npm greet?
Nah. Hold on. I'm in the wrong folder. I need to go into paintings app. No, painting app. Because it just says hello there. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is that this stuff is just command line commands that we can run. And npm allows us to create little scripts to make that easier. Next thing we have is dependencies, and this is quite similar to the gem file in which you can just list the dependencies that you need for your application to work. You can have the name of the repo. If you had the repo actually on GitHub, you could specify that as well, and you have some configuration options here as well. But the main thing is this stuff. So we know that we install these three things: React, React DOM, and React scripts. And if you check where they are, they are inside its node modules folder. So whenever you install a library with npm, everything gets installed in this node modules folder, which is annoying because it will end up having like many copies of the same libraries over and over. And each of these is about, just by doing this, I think it's about 300 megabytes. Yeah, that's not what I wanted. I want open in terminal. No, not in terminal. Field finder. There we are. Node modules. Get info. Yeah.
Wow.
So even a completely fresh version of Node modules folder is already 286 megabytes. It's not what you will put online when you're done. When you run build, you never really keep these things. You only keep the libraries that you actually need to run your application. So it boils down to about 6 megabytes in the end. You can minimize even more. Quick tip before we move on. This is not really an NPM lecture. But never include node module folders on GitHub, because you don't want your repo to be 300 megabytes just because of that folder. What you do instead is you always put that in the git ignore, and you always push without taking this into account. So when somebody wants to run your code, all they need to do is get everything except for that, and then they just do npm install, and they can install their own libraries. Right? So they still need that stuff, but you don't need to put it on GitHub every time. Cool. Now that we're clear on that, let's take a look at what we actually have. So it tells me that to start it, I can do npm start. Hopefully it'll open it over there. It looks like it is. It takes a second or 10. Ta-da! And this is basically the boilerplate that the Create React app does for us. So let's take a look at what they actually created. They created just a little test if you wanted to start writing tests. This is a nice example of how you could start. I'm going to delete it for now just for simplicity. I'm going to delete a lot of things. I'm going to get rid of this CSS. I'm going to get rid of maybe this one. I'll get rid of everything except for index and app. Subfiles that we don't really want. So now it's going to crash, telling me it can't find those files. So what we need to do is we need to start looking at this imports. So up until now, we worked with just JavaScript files that we put in the script one by one, line after line. Now that stops here, and we're going to start using modules. And the way modules work is you can import stuff and you can export stuff. And the reason why we can't do this is because it's not really supported by the browsers yet. Actually, kind of is now, but this is because we're transpiling this code in the end. So the code we're actually running in the browser is not this, but it's a transpilation of this. So we're actually transforming this code and turning it into palette code later on. We couldn't do that before because we were not using any tooling. We were just putting JavaScript in the browser. So we had to write JavaScript that the browser could understand. So now basically what it means is if I want to use React, I need to import React. And by doing import React from React, where do you think it's getting it from? Yeah, so it's coming from the node modules folder. Whenever you put a path like this, just the name, it will look in your modules folder. When you put a path like this, which is a relative path, it will say, I'm going to look for index CSS in here, which is not finding. And it's also not finding the service worker. So I need to get rid of all that stuff that I'm not really using, doesn't exist anymore. Now I should get some different errors. Like this. Let's get rid of that. And if we go here, you can see that I was trying to import the logo. I'm trying to import app CSS. They don't exist anymore. So I'm basically going to get rid of everything and just put an H1 here for now, saying and that works. So at this stage, for example, is where I will keep the template and then copy paste this later on, so I don't have to remove all those files every time. Or it depends on what you want to do. Some stuff you want to keep, maybe. This is a valid app. First thing I do is just get rid of the semicolons. I don't personally like them. All right, then here we are. Now look, you may have noticed that the first thing I had here before I even created this app is this other little file that I got called paintings.js. And this is just the equivalent of, imagine like you're making an API call and you're getting a list of paintings from an API. But to make it simple, because we don't want to do fetches yet into our React app, we're going to just have it locally as a file. And we have this little array of about 100 paintings. And we're exporting that from this file. What that means is we're doing an export default. That means we can export anything we want without giving it a name. And then we can import it when we import from this file. And it works like this. I can go into my app. I can come here and I can say import from, I guess it's a bit further away. We have paintings. Actually, I'm gonna move this into source. So now we can do paintings. And if I say console log, blah, 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 you can see that the name I gave it doesn't matter. And you can see that it still found those paintings and it printed them on the page. So basically at this point, anywhere in my app, I could use this and my paintings are there. Obviously, don't name things that. Give it a sensible name. But you could. So just a very quick look at how this is working. The structure, this is a very common structure for React. So we have at least an index file and an app file. App is where the mother component lives. And index is where we sort of initialize stuff. So one thing we need to do is we need to import React, because really what this is doing behind the scenes is react.createElement or rendering some React components in there. So we always need React. And we need React DOM because we need to put stuff on the page. Right, and we're saying get it to me and put it in the root div. And we're also importing app because this is the component that we created in the other file. And because we want to access it here, because we need it there, we need to import that too. And in app, what we're doing is we're importing React and component. And this is a class component, so it's a bit different from what we've been seeing before. And in React, you can have both. And they act pretty much the same, only when you have a class, what you need is you need a class to extend from this component, which is like the mother component of React. And then if you're creating a class, in order for it to work, instead of returning directly, you need to have a render method. And the render method is the one that returns the HTML or JSX. So that works. If I wanted to, I could turn this into just a function, and I can get rid of this and that. And that still works. The reason why we need classes is because classes give us access to state and to other methods that we will later on need. But as long as you just have a component that takes props and renders HTML and does nothing else, functions are the way to go. Now, you know we have access to paintings, and you know that this paintings thing is an array of 100 paintings. What do you think we could do if we wanted to show all 100 paintings on the page? Remember what we did in the last one? I gave you a bit of a spoiler. We could, but even better, we can put JavaScript in there, right? Yeah, we can map over them.
Also, does it necessarily need to be just one line command?
It needs to be an expression. So you cannot put if statements, while loops, for loops, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you can put anything that's an expression. So you look up the difference between statement and expressions. So you could put anything like ternaries, conditions, and anything that's just evaluates in a single sort of line. This is valid though, because all we're doing is going to map. This is an expression, just a single expression. And what we're saying is, for each painting, do something. This gives us back an array. And remember, we can have arrays as the children of the component. So this is a component. And what we're doing is we're going to create some more elements in there, in an array, to be displayed. So what we can do now is we can just write some HTML, which is similar to, remember when we were doing the strings like this? We could join and map and do, but now we don't need to actually use strings. We can use actual HTML in there. So let's create a list element, and let's say inside we're going to put the painting. Do you remember what paintings have? Title? Title. Look at that. Let me close this. Let me make this a bit bigger. So now, just like I described it, I get the paintings, and for each painting, I want to put a list element on the page with the title in there. Obviously, I think I mentioned before that it works without the UL, but it's a bit hacky, so let's actually put the UL. We can just wrap this whole thing in a UL. Still works. It's pretty nice. And because we're iterating over the painting, we're not really limited to a list element or anything. We have a lot of info about the painting, right? So just like when we were doing the render in JavaScript, we can add way more than this. Let's say inside the list element, we actually want to have a div. And maybe we can say title is this. Let's see how that works. Okay, so that's working. Maybe the next thing is we can put this in a p tag. We actually have an image URL. How would you add the image? I want to put it here. What would you do? imgsrc equals, let's close it there. We need squigglies because we need to use JavaScript. And what do we put in there?
Do we need to use quotes?
You can, but you don't have to. So now each painting we render, we're going to render it with the title and the image. If we have 2,000, we'll render 2,000. If we have 100, we'll render 100. So this is an array, right? Indefinite stuff. Now, hopefully you may have noticed that we're really just cramming a single component with a lot of stuff in there. And the whole point of React actually is to divide things into multiple components. And this is also the reason why we can have different files and we can import and export. So to me, if you think about it, in my head, this is a component. That's a painting. It's a painting that gets repeated over and over and over. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to grab this and I'm going to extract it. Not everything, but just the HTML. This is initially obviously not going to work. It's going to complain. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it painting.js. Painting.js, so I need to actually import React. We always import React. Whenever you need to use JSX, you will need React. And now you can do const painting. It's a function that takes props, right? Remember, just like before. And what it returns is this HTML here. And you may notice that we don't really have access to painting.image because painting is not available here for us. Let's export default, and I'm going to export the painting. So what can we do now? This is a painting component. I can go back to my app and I can say I want that painting component, and I'm going to import it from my painting file. What can I do? Well, I can actually just instantiate a painting here. And right away you can see that the error I get now is painting is not defined, and that's what I foretold before, right? So it's telling me painting.js is trying to access painting, but painting doesn't really exist. So it's giving me an error. Any ideas on how I can actually get a painting to be passed down?
Export.
Props. What are props? Yeah. So props, remember we looked at them, props are really just a JavaScript hash table, right? Just an object. What can we put in there? Anything that's valid JavaScript. So what could be in this props? Well, we could pass down a painting object in there. So then whenever we instantiate a painting, now we need to make sure that we pass down a painting object. And the painting object at least is going to have an image and a title for this to work, right? So what I need to change here is I need to do props and props. Oops. There we are. Still not going to work. Or it kind of might work. Okay, maybe it just dies. Yeah, it's coming up with some issues here. It's saying can't read image of undefined. That means props exists, but painting doesn't exist yet. Why doesn't painting exist? We don't need to import them here. Yeah, so if I look at my app, I have each painting right here because I'm mapping over it. But am I ever passing that down to the painting? I'm just instantiating an empty painting, which is why it's complaining because, yeah, I have props, but props is literally completely empty right now because I'm not passing anything down. So how would you pass the painting down? Go? In parents. Like that? Nah. How do you pass a prop? No? No? I mean, eventually, but what's first? It's a key value, right? This is a key value pair. What's the key? The name of the prop. So we just type the name of the prop, whatever we want it to be, equals the prop. So the value of that prop. So in this case, if we look at the way we wrote painting, the painting component, what prop are we expecting? Nope. Yep. We're expecting a painting, and the painting should have image and title, but the prop is the painting. So what that tells me is that, okay, whenever I'm instantiating a painting, I need to make sure I pass it a prop, and I need to make sure the prop is called exactly painting, because that's what we're expecting on the other end, right? That contract needs to sort of match. I'm expecting the word painting in there, I need to pass it down as painting. Now equals, and now I can do curly braces, and now I can pass down the painting.
That's not a painting.
Huh?
4 paintings in a row. Only 5.
What are you talking about?
Painting.
Oh, yeah. So for each painting, so map paintings, and for each painting, create a painting component and pass down the painting.
Painting equals painting.
Yo, I heard you like painting, so I give you a painting you can use with your painting so you can paint while you paint.
So we're mapping your paintings.
Like exhibit. But does that make sense? We're passing down just another prop. And look, the prop needs to be specific. So if I say something else, object thingy, it's obviously not going to work, and it's still going to complain. And the reason why it's not going to work, in a minute you'll see an error, is because this is the name of the prop, and that's the name of the key that the props have. That object will now have a key of object thingy, and that's not what the component is expecting, right? The component is expecting a painting. That's why this fails. We don't have painting prop, we now have object thingy in there. So bear in mind that you can name this anything you want, but you need to make sure that both ends agree on what's being passed. It's a painting. So now we've successfully pretty much abstracted away the painting logic to each painting. And this is how components work. If I show you this, right? Let's imagine that's a website that we're trying to create. We made the sketch. We want it to look like this. What potential components do you see in there? Which components? Okay. What's image? Where does it start? Where does it end? So maybe this thing? Okay, so each of those could be a component? Yeah, sure. Anything else? Great. This whole thing itself is a component, right? It's the parent component, the app component. What else?
Navigation bar.
The navigation bar, it's its own. Anything else? You could turn them into their own component, or you could just put them as part of the painting component. So the answer is, it's a bit arbitrary how far you go, right? But you can either, when you're designing an app with React, what I do is you can either start from the bottom and like the tiny things and then start scaling up, or you could start from the top and then start scaling down. So if we wanted to start from the very top, what's the top component? Well, it's going to be, like Dina said, the whole thing, the wrapper. What's going to be inside? Well, it's going to be divided at least into two, right? It's going to be divided into the navigation bar and then a list of paintings. Then this painting is going to be the parent, like a painting list. And the painting list is going to be divided then into, so it's going to have more subcomponents in there. It's going to have one for each painting. And if we look, that's pretty much what we have. Are we missing anything in our app so far to match this? I mean, forget about the votes, but that's the browser. We could put a search bar. That's fine. Let's add our own later. So let's try to, first of all, try to come to exactly what we have here, right? Something similar. I guess, do we have a navigation? I guess we do. We have that title. That could count, right? Let's look at the structure of our app right now. We start with app, and app is that container that we talked about. And we can say the app is here. Is the parent. What does it have? Yeah. So it's got really two things. It's got that H1 and it's got the UL. Now if you think about it, those are not really components, are they? They're just elements on the page. So we could turn them into components if we want to. And I advise you do. We'll look into how we can do that now in a second. But then what does the UL have inside? Yeah, and to be more precise, it's got a bunch of painting components. Right? Multiple. It's like a many relationship. How many? We don't know, we don't care. Just multiple. So at the moment I'm sort of creating that list in there. But do you think the app should be responsible for having a UL in there? Or should we maybe do something close to what we're doing here? Maybe we can have a separate component that just takes care of rendering all the paintings on the screen. That would look way cleaner. Because imagine if you start adding more things to the page and this just gets longer and longer and longer. Then we're back to the square one where we have this issue that we just put a lot of stuff in one component. And the point of this is each component, much like when we were writing functions before, each component should really take care of one thing and do it well. And have that responsibility. So now I know if I actually want to change the way a painting looks, then I can go into painting. Let's say I want to add something else. Let's add the name of the author. So we have paintings, artist name. Yeah? So look how easy. And I know exactly where to go. So hopefully you can see how this is a blessing compared to what we had before with JavaScript, because the structure is pretty clear. And also, I don't need to do any query selectors. I don't need to do any inner HTML. I literally just change some data here and everything follows.
Keep it like a list, remove the dot.
Remove the which dot?
The bullet point.
Oh yeah, that's CSS though, that's styling. We can do that later on. So now let's just focus on the actual structure of the app. Next thing I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to extract this away. And I want to have something, I know I'm going to create a new component and I'll call it painting list. Yeah? And it's going to complain, it's going to say, well, painting list doesn't exist. So what do we need to do?
Create a painting with that.
Yeah, I'll just put it here. I'm going to chuck this here for a second. I will use it later on. That's the HTML I want to eventually use. I need to import React, right? Never forget. And now I can do const painting list equals, it's a function that takes props, and in return it will give me back that. Yep. Remember, export default means I can export anything, and the name is not taken into account. I can then call it whatever when I import it. Why is it still failing? Yeah. Do we still need this painting here? Are we using the word painting anywhere here? So what that tells me is that was abstracted away. Now the painting list needs the painting. But the app that no longer needs the painting. The app just needs the painting list. So what we're efficiently doing is getting rid of this and replacing it with painting list, which is another component. Yeah? So I can just replace painting with painting list. Now it's giving me other errors. So yeah, we have a couple of choices. We can either keep importing these in app and maybe pass them down, like so. That would work. Still failing because if we look at the painting list, yeah, but let's try it the first way. So I'm passing it as a prop, and it's still failing because I'm trying to access it directly, not from the props. You can see my editor is telling me that I'm never actually using props. It's a bit sort of dull. So I can do props, paintings. What's the next error? Yeah, which file is having this issue? Why is it having that issue? So just because we're no longer using it in app doesn't mean we don't need to import it, right? At some point we clearly need a painting component that we just created. So I can do import painting from painting. Ta-da! That's working, and if I go back to app, well, to me it looks way cleaner. Following Barney's idea, yeah, maybe we don't really need to pass this down as a prop. We could, and I want to show you that we can. That's how we pass down information from one component to the next. But in this case, unless we need the paintings anywhere else, we could just not pass the paintings here, go to our painting list, import the paintings directly, and now we don't need the prop anymore. We can just use paintings. And that works the same way. Right? So now we basically moved where the paintings are being imported from app to painting list directly.
Do we need the props then?
Well, clearly we're not really using props right now. It's grayed out as well, and it's working. So unless I need any other props, what I could do is I could signal that I'm not using any props, but just turning this into an empty parenthesis. I'm saying I could take props, but I'm not taking any because I'm not really using them right now. That's fine. So do you see how we're slowly structuring the app? And if I go back to app, you might also notice that we're not really using props in app as well. So I could just change that to an empty parenthesis to signal we're not using it. You may have noticed that because we're using a functional component, we're not using a class component anymore. We're not really using this component word anymore. So we could just get rid of it as well. So we're just keeping things clean, really. Another thing that I don't quite like is the fact that I have an H1 directly in there. That's really the header of my app. And maybe later it can grow, it can be something else. I don't want that logic to be in app. I want that logic to be separate. Right? So what do? Cut it from there. I'll say I'm going to create maybe a header component. Now it's going to complain, same as before. We need to create header.js, and we need to import React. And we're going to create a header component that's going to take props, and it's just really, oopsie, just going to return that HTML for me. Hard-coded, I don't really need any props to be fair right now because I'm not doing anything with props here. I can export default. I export the header. I can go back to app. And now I need to make sure that in app I'm actually importing header from header. Ta-da! Still works. Only now I have a header component, and if I ever need to modify what the header looks like or what it contains, I know that instead of having to go to app for everything, I can go to header. And it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward to see what I need to change. So far, so good. Da-da-da. Do we have a navbar? I want to see if we can do. Cool. I want to reuse this navbar that we created before. Remember, with the PO and all that stuff. So I'm actually going to copy this. And I'm going to move it over here, and I'm going to create a new component. Call it navbar. Just to show you how we can actually reuse the stuff we created before. Maybe without the just navbar. So I'm just going to make that a little bit cleaner. There we are. What do I need to do for this file to be valid? What am I missing? Yeah. So look, I'm reusing exactly the same code that we wrote in the morning. And I'm going to go to app. And I'm going to get rid of the header. Instead, I'm going to replace it with a navbar. And you can even see that my editor was clever enough to pick up that I was trying to use navbar, and it imported it for me at the top. That's VS Code for you. So I'm no longer using header. I can get rid of that. And navbar. Ooh, it just failed because I changed the name later on. Cool. And just so you know, whenever you are instantiating a React component, you have two ways, and I'm showing you right there. You could do it like in navbar, so open tag, close tag, or you could do it like in Painterlist, just open and close in the same one. This is auto closing. The reason why this exists is because sometimes some components, we will see later in a more advanced lesson, we can actually add text here, for example. And that's like a child of navbar. But if you're not using any children, if you're not doing any of this, then really it doesn't make sense for you to just open and close the same tag. It's a bit annoying. So what React allows you to do is just open and close like this. Why do you think we're getting this error? Cannot read property uppercase of undefined.
We're not passing any props.
We're not really passing any props, right? Remember when we created the navbar? What do we need? We needed the color. Let's take a look at the navbar again. We need a color, icon, title, subtitle. We had names that we can, I guess, get rid of. We don't need those names anymore. So let me actually go back to the code that we wrote before, and I can show you. This is where we instantiated our code. This is where we created the navbar. And this is how I'm passing it. The color, title, subtitle, icon, names, age. We don't really need names and age, so I'm going to get rid of that. But we do need the rest. And I need to make sure now when I instantiate the navbar, I actually instantiate it with all these props. It's navbar. It's kind of working. It's not styled properly because we don't have semantic UI. So the only thing missing, and I will show you, we can do npm install semantic UI CSS, I believe. And what that's going to do is, if I check my package JSON, did it do it? Did it do it? Where is it? Sometimes it won't save in the package.json file. In that case, you can do npm install -- save. Let's see if that makes a difference. Not really. But does it exist? Yeah, it's here. Ah, I know why. I forgot to cd into the project directory, so I created a new node modules folder outside. Don't do that. I'm just showing you what you shouldn't be doing. I want to do it not in the master props folder, React props. I want to go into paintings app. And now I can do this. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. I think my computer is getting a bit old. There you go. You can see it was added here as well. What that means is next time somebody does npm install, they will install all these things, including the CSS that I just got in here. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that file is now in something called semantic UI CSS, semantic.min.css. This is just a file that exists. So if I go to my node modules, you can see it's this huge pile of libraries. But among all of them, nice. You can see it's working. You can see that I downloaded semantic UI CSS. And you can see that if I open it, inside it's got this semantic.min.css. And that's all the CSS code we need for semantic to work. It's all minified and uglified. That's why it looks like that.
Why is it uglified like that?
To occupy less space.
Is that the reason?
Yeah.
There's a lot of websites use the same thing, make it look as ugly as possible. I assume that's just so people don't find it as easy to copy.
It's still possible to copy and reverse engineer. I mean, it's partly obfuscated, but the main reason why people do this is to be able to compress the file. Instead of 10K, it could be 5K, for example. So halving the size, or even more sometimes. So that's working. Maybe I can go back to my, I don't need the header, so I'm going to delete this file now. I changed my mind. I don't need that component. Instead, I want the navbar. The navbar is working, and now I can say here, welcome to my painting app. Yeah? What else do we have time for? I can show you, as you were asking before, if we wanted to add some CSS, we can create any CSS file. And now, in order to be able to apply that CSS to our page, what we need to do is we need to go somewhere in a file, like for example, index is a good place, and we can import that file. And just by doing that, we're actually running this CSS file. So whatever we write in here now, we can say body background pink, and it works. So we could do something like UL, was it list style none? Right, you wanted the paintings not to have any lists. That's cool. But what else we can do? We can go back to app. Let's say that the paintings now. Yeah, I'm creating paintings. That's great. But I want each painting to have a class name of painting. Right? That's going to allow me to go back into my CSS and now easily select all my paintings because they have a class of painting. So now what can I do? I can say, for example, border, solid, 2 pixels, black. See it there? You can say width, 200 pixels. I can say margin, and padding. Ooh. We'll fix that better later, but hopefully it's starting to make sense. And we just described what one single painting should look like, right? And then because we're mapping over it, we can always just go back and change it. So let's go back, and maybe to finish this off, I want to check what information, what other info I have in the paintings, and maybe add something extra. What would you like to add? Maybe birthday and death day all together, like when they do like date dash date. Right? Where is death date? How do I get to death date? So this whole thing from here is a painting, right? So I need to go to painting, artist, birthday, and then painting, artist, death day. Right? So what can I do with that information? Well, I know that when I'm instantiating a painting, I am passing down that info. So all I need to do is maybe come here. Let's say I want to put it here right next to the artist. So I'm going to put the artist here. I'm going to change this here just for clarity, so I know that this is in there. And now I'm going to say I'm going to add 2 bits of JavaScript here with a dash in between, and I'm going to say props, painting, artist, birthday, and then props, painting, artist, death day. Ooh.
BR.
Let's do a BR for now. Do we need a BR though? To be fair, if I'm going to do that, I would rather just put it in 2 different p tags. How are you finding it? Do you see the benefit of using React? Is it starting to make sense how we can sort of structure your application in a way that it's quite easy to work with?
It's structured in a nice way, like separate.
Yeah, and we had files before, right? But it was mainly up to you to sort of come up with your conventions and how you wanted to do it. And it was really easy to get it wrong and then have a bit of like big bowl of code. I think we're pretty much done for this lecture. Do you have any questions? Binding, yes. So in the labs, what you may have seen, and we will look at that in detail later, so I won't go too much into detail now. We have lectures on that coming. But sometimes you had methods, right? You have methods in the components. In this case, we managed to create a whole structure without any classes, because really everything is just props and HTML. So this is really clean. But let's say we wanted to do, let's turn this back into a class. So now I need to do class, extends, React component, or I can just component. Or I could maybe put component in here, it's the same thing. This is, by the way, called a named export. What that means is the reason I'm putting curly braces here is because I'm not, hasn't been exported as default. This was exported with a specific name. And if I need to import it, I need to actually import it with curly braces and that exact same name, or it's not going to work. And now I can use it there, like that. What's missing for this class component to work? We are missing return, but return is actually inside the render method. Right, so now we can grab all this stuff we had and basically chuck it in there. And you may have seen, for clarity, if you want to keep all the HTML in the same place, the issue is that if we have a return and we have nothing next to it, you can see that this is all grayed out right away. And what's happening is return returns undefined, and then this is not taken into account. So to avoid that, if you wanted to move to the next line because it looks prettier, you can do that with parentheses. And now you can indent this a little bit, and that's a bit cleaner. So now we have a class. And in the class, we can create methods, right? Just like in plain JavaScript, classes can have methods, and we create them just by typing some stuff here. And we can do this. And look at this. I can say console log I am this. We're not really calling the function anywhere, but maybe I can call it here. I can say this.greet in the render. Just call it. Yeah? You with me so far? Ignore the warnings. Actually, let's not ignore the warnings. Let's go to painting list. In painting list, we are creating many paintings. This is where the duplication of code happens. Therefore, I can check, do paintings have an ID? Yeah, they do. So I can go back to my painting list and I can add a key of painting.id. No more error. There we go. This is just another warning. Forget about that for now. You can say, seriously? Yeah. That's what I wanted. You can see that this is a method I just created, and it's saying, I am app, right? And it's giving me the whole app, because I'm using the keyword this, and this is used to refer to the instance of the app that I just created. Why would I need to bind this? Well, because sometimes we will pass this down as a function to a different component, right? We can pass it down as a prop, and I'll show you what I mean. I can get rid of this here, and I can instead pass it to, let's say, the painting list or the navbar. I'm going to pass greet, and I'm going to pass this.greet. So I'm passing down that method that I created, right? You with me so far? It's a bit more advanced, but just like any string or any numbers or arrays, I can also pass down methods. What does that mean? That means that now painting list has access to props and has access to this greet prop. That's just a function. And I'll show you what I can do. So I'm going to do this so I can write some more lines here at the top. And now I can do props. Actually, I'm not actually getting props in here, so I need to make sure I'm using those props. And now I can do props, greet. What do you think I'm going to get? I am what? Not quite. Why doesn't this work? So this keyword in JavaScript is really dynamic. It changes wherever you call it, unless you use an arrow function or you bind the function. What binding does is it fixes whatever this context means. So what was happening is if I go to app, well here in app, this means the app. But in the other function, it means the function. So to fix that, what I can do is I can not just pass the greet, but I can bind greet, and I bind it to a specific this context. In this case, whatever this is in here. You see what's going on? Now that's a little bit overcomplicated. The way that people usually do this now is you would need to create a constructor. You need to call super because you're extending. So that, you see how complex it can get very quickly? And now you need to say, I can get rid of this here. Leave it as it was. And I can actually do the binding here if I wanted to. I can say this dot greet equals this greet bind this. And it's super long and it's super annoying. But sometimes you need to do this. If you're going to be passing stuff down that depends on the context of this, it's going to break unless you bind it. Right? And this is the reason why you need to bind, to make sure that after you pass that down and a different component is using that method, it can still see the same this context. This is a much better way though. And it's because we have some advanced JavaScript that doesn't exist in the browser yet, but it's coming soon. It's in the, Chrome Canary? That you can update. There's a version of Chrome that you can download called Canary, and it's got a lot of like experimental features that will come in the next versions of Chrome. Chrome Canary already has this feature, but it's not available in any other browser yet. And I'll show you what it is. So, you know that I created a method called greet? If I wanted to create this as an arrow function, I currently have no way to do this inside a class. But with the new syntax, I can actually do this. And you can see how I didn't need to use the constructor. I didn't need to bind. All I'm doing is I changed greet instead of being a regular method. Now it's an arrow method. No, it works because we're using React and because we're actually transpiling the code. So we can do it in React right now, today. In fact, I recommend that you generally don't use bind, but every time you create a method, every single time in React, you create it like this. Does that answer your question? Anyone else? All right, we're done.